That's okay.
Welcome to our Provo Municipal Council work session. It's 1:05 p.m. on Tuesday, May 5th, 2015. We're in the City Center Conference Room, 351 West Center, Provo, Utah. We'll call the meeting to order. This meeting is recorded and will be posted to the Provo City website. Please be aware that the microphones are on the table and do pick up the noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the recordings can pick up side conversations. We'll start with the roll call. If you'll start with Mr. Parker.
Wayne Parker. Hal Miller. James Gould.
Kim Santiago.
Kay Van Buren.
Callie Hales.
Gary Winterton. Matt Taylor. Brian Jones.
Louise Jurgensen.
Thank you. Our opening prayer will be given by Nathan Murray. He's a Management Analyst 3 in our Economic Development Department.
Our Heavenly Father, we bow our heads at this time in gratitude for the joy and safety we experience in this community. We pray now as we meet together concerning matters affecting Provo City that we'll have wisdom and we'll be led by a spirit of cooperation and trust. We pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ.
Do you answer a question or two?
Yeah, sure.
Do we have any questions for Mr.
What's 3?
3.
Analyst 3.
It's a title.
2. 1.
Yeah.
There is a 1 and a 2.
There is a 1 and a 2.
Part of the career series track, and typically sort of mid-level management positions will start out at a level 1, and as experience and education increases, they can be advanced to a 2 and a 3 position. Sometimes with engineers, there's even a 4 position prior to entering some type of assistant or deputy or division head role.
The better question is probably what's a management analyst?
Yes.
Okay, ask that one.
That was a very good question.
Yeah. It's probably kind of just a generic title that you get projects and duties as assigned, dealing at some sort of professional or professional level. So most of my work is projects related to economic development. Like day to day, it's mitigating wetlands at Mount Vista or applying for grants for an airport, working with a business who's wanting to improve some infrastructure like a road. Talk almost daily with just different developers or realtors about properties. That's sort of been my role the last year or two.
I noticed in Scott's report last week that a contingent from your office had recently been in Kansas City. Were you a member?
That was me, yeah. I was there with a guy named Mo Reeder from Death Mountain. So the Kauffman Foundation sponsors our 1 Million Cups meeting. And once a year they bring out the organizers. Last year it was Dixon and someone else from the community. And they just talk about the different programs that are available, how a 1 Million Cups program should be run, and it really is just to strengthen their initiative for education and entrepreneurship. We actually applied, interested for, it was interesting. So Kauffman Foundation did an analysis of all the major metros, and that seems the smaller ones in the United States. And they sent out letters to the 20 cities they thought were the most entrepreneurial. Provo was one of those. And they asked us if we would be willing to apply for a grant. It could be up to $500,000 for programs that support entrepreneurship. So we submitted, 16 cities responded. And when I was out there, one of the gentlemen who had been reviewing those actually sought me out. Hey, you're with Provo, just wanted to say you guys are really well. He explained kind of where we were at and some of their analytics and metrics and how we stacked up versus other cities and why he was really impressed. And he actually invited me to his office the next day to go over those. So it's kind of exciting to see just nationally people are aware of some of the good things that are going on. You know, we were there with cities like Tulsa or Dallas, Tallahassee. Cities with like robust industry and universities. And when we talk about them, like they were aware of, in tech at least, like what companies were in our area and who's doing what. So it was kind of fun to see.
So in that same report from Mr. Bowles, you mentioned that you're going to Las Vegas to the, I think it was the ICSC
Yeah.
conference, and that's where all the retailers go when you're able to. Is that a place where you can recruit retail or
Yes.
recruit people to recruit?
And it's kind of the conference of conferences for retail. It's national and even international in scope. So it's where all the site selectors, shopping centers, their development teams come out to see what's available. That is, I think, the 17th through the 20th. And these homes will be there with Scott and Dave Walter, redevelopment. They've already lined up about 5 or 6 meetings, face to face with people. They started doing that back like in February, March when they released who's going to be the attendees list. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. And I just was with Scott and he was preparing. Well, we've been working on this for a couple of months, but an actual publication that we're taking to people to kind of showcase just property data. So it's
So did you say that was with developers or with the retailers themselves, or both?
Could be both, yeah. So a lot of, I mean, you depend on the size of your store, how you manage it. You may have your own in-house team. You may contract with somebody to represent something like that. It's, hey, we're looking to expand in these markets. We want this type of square foot, this kind of acreage in the site. We need this demographic, and people meet, talk, and see what's available.
So the conference that you went to in Salt Lake, I think it was, for the shopping centers?
Yeah, so
what did you glean from that? Were there any
So actually,
takeaways?
Scott was out. That was a Friday. What he had reported to us was that it was someone from related with the ICSC as an organization, and they go out to different regions throughout, building up to the conference to kind of talk about what I guess trends are happening in the region. Somebody from Toronto, and they actually put. I don't know, you never want to put too much into your own hype, I guess, but they were really positive just on Utah and this region in general in terms of growth and what was happening in terms of retail. There is a tendency for just kind of the up-and-coming generation to want experiential shopping. That even, yes, there's still online purchases and people always do purchasing online, but it's not where your big transactions are happening anymore. Like there's kind of a shift back to maybe some of the, you walk into a store and like, and they do this in like Japan or Germany, you'll have like a personal stylist greet you at the store, and they're you're good morning, Mr. Murray. Like you like hats. Some of them size you up for hats and that sort of thing. So there's this trend to that style, and people are actually looking for more what they call the clicks to bricks, where you have an online boutique or store that's really popular. Now they're wanting to bring that experience to your customer rather than just purchasing online. So there are stores looking for like that, and then they lend themselves to traditional downtowns, and that's the kind of this atmosphere they're looking for. So maybe that's kind of what they're looking for in terms of going out to these cities, or going out to the ICSC like that. They're looking for those types of stores that maybe can fit in their downtown like that.
They see Provo as a desirable location for that type of retail?
I'm sure someone does. I think it's just a matter of, like anything you sell people on, maybe they don't know it, but try to make a case of why you are an appropriate destination for their store or their shop. But the gentleman who was presenting, Mr. Toronto, again, like I said, I think his words were, be prepared for the boom in Utah, and it was just Salt Lake and Provo and this region in general in terms of just growth in that sector. So you're building a lot of housing. Usually what follows that is retail opportunities.
As long as everyone has a customized gas mask.
Yes.
The phrase silicon slopes, you hearing that nationally?
No, I think there's kind of, actually it's a negative connotation. For a while it's like, oh, we're going to be the next Silicon Valley, but everybody wants to be their own unique thing now. I don't think people want to associate themselves with that. And Silicon, I think the technology is sort of a bygone era anyway. Like I think they still use Silicon, but I don't know that it's as common as just, I mean, it's associated with tech, yes, but people are starting to be really proud of where they live. Like when we were in Kansas City, it seemed like people were, the common phrase was just, oh, we're doing so much better than we were 5 years ago. There's this movement to really grow or kind of look where you stand and feel where you're at in your city. And so people want to be in Des Moines, people want to be in Fort Collins and do their thing and really build up communities. Where there was this trend of people kind of went away to the coast for a while and got educated and had some experience in these big growing companies, and now they're moving back. Just that's what I'm seeing. It seems that way.
Nathan, is there a trend to hire real estate brokers, or is it still in larger cities to go out and find someone to help fill your spaces and to develop things? It's such a long process to be able to start from the beginning to get all the way to the end.
Yeah.
That it's a challenge for somebody to stay on top of that long. Is it something that people are doing now? Is hiring brokers to take care of that and go through that lengthy process, or is it still, or are we in the right position where we're at now, just having you guys go out and do it? What do you?
I think what you're asking is, are we seeing like the end users hire the brokers, or are we, as a staff level, trained enough to come?
No, I know. I'm not questioning your training, but I'm just wondering if there's other brokers outside that actually go around to the different retailers and communities, and actually, because it is such a long process. I talked with some guys. It takes 2.5 years for me to get a lease with the company. And he's a small company, but he works with the Bed Bath & Beyonds and those type of things, and it's just such a challenge. Are we finding that we need to hire a broker or to help deal with some of those things?
I don't think we need to. Well, in some instances we may want to. But a lot of it's just what relationships you have. So, as an example, EDC Utah called yesterday. They have a business that's looking at Provo. It's a tech company that's looking for
What? Who called?
EDC Utah, which is contracted by the governor's office to do a lot of the promotion and site selection.
Got you. Okay.
They were contacted by a company. It's a tech company that's looking to more kind of a West Coast office. So Provo's kind of on the short west, as we are frequently. But the person that's running kind of the analysis is a large brokerage firm. I think that's, if you're a company looking to move, that it's not your, why would you spend time doing all the analysis when you can just hire that out? And that's great. But sometimes the bottleneck is those companies are going to give priority to what communities give the best incentives. I think sometimes these brokerage firms structure their payments and what kind of deal they can get for the end user. As a city, we've kind of taken a policy of that. I mean, we're pretty careful on what kind of incentives we give. We're not very liberal with what we have to offer and what we give really. And so sometimes it may hurt us. But we think that in developing strong relationships with regional local brokers, that we can hopefully mitigate some of the concerns that those larger firms have in trying to get the best deal monetarily, and then just focus on the qualitative things. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does, to some degree, because I thank you. Yeah, it's got it.
Well, I think that's particularly true on the retail side. The deal is done between a retailer and a property owner and potentially a broker in between. The city's not really typically a component of that unless we incentivize the developer to do something, but typically the incentive doesn't go directly to the retailer. And so we spend a lot of time working with real estate developers. We've had, 4 or 5 meetings the last couple of weeks on significant retail potential, but typically they are with developers who say, I can bring X retailer to the table. And so So again, we try to establish a relationship and a reputation with the retailer, but really it's kind of secondary to the relationship with the broker.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
So since the Retail Strategies Group reported their findings to the council, where are we at in the process with them, and are they going to help recruit businesses, or what is their?
We still have, so they still have a final report, like a final document yet. We're still working through details or some of the design elements of that actual report. I think we're contracted with them to kind of provide some services through the end of the year, and then we would have an option if we choose to, for them to represent us at ICSC or other regional conferences going forward. I don't know if this time we're going to take that, but we do have some services. So they'll have our brochures and information, and they'll be on their kind of their map, because they're a pretty well connected group at this particular conference. But after that, it's up to our choice. I'm sure it'll be a cost. Based on the cost, I don't really know.
They haven't given us an offer to,
Yeah, they told us what their fee structure is. I don't know it right now. I don't know that it was going to be worth it right now. So.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Murray? We asked a lot.
No.
We're all very interested in retail. So thank you. Appreciate
Thank
you being here. And Chair Garrett has joined us, so we'll turn the time back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Thanks for helping us get started today, and I apologize for my being late. We'll move to the next item then, which will be a discussion directed, in fact, the next two items by our Executive Director, Matt Taylor. First, on the draft outcome policies and intent statements that we talked about in our last council retreat. Matt.
Thank you. I'm going to utilize the whiteboard, and I'm really going to sort of combine items 2 and 3, if that's okay. Could you possibly read item 3?
So item 3 then is the discussion on strategies for the appropriate distribution and mix of life cycle housing types, including affordable housing. City boundary. That's an interesting mix of topics.
Well, interesting. The two policies. There's actually 3. They all sort of relate to this topic in some way, especially 2 of them. However, I already apologize to Mr. Sewell that Council Chair Garrett and Councilmember Sewell sat down as part of the Governance Committee or Rules Committee to work on their statement. My notes of that meeting have vanished, and so I don't have a draft of their policy prepared. I said to Mr. Miller, everyone here, maybe they show up in a couple of years. And, of course, I know that I had put them there. But
we can probably come up with that.
Yeah, I think I have a fairly good recollection of what that discussion was. We just need to reconstruct that. We have the committee that involved Councilmember Santiago, Mayor Curtis, and I believe Mr. Winterton. Was that? No.
Those with Hal.
Maybe Vic K. Because I know Hal. Well,
I can't remember.
I have a draft of that one, but I think this discussion may influence a discussion on that. So, if anything, we can talk more about that at the end. But next week's Vision or Council Budget Retreat is the first part's going to focus on Vision 23, and there's some key points in there that may affect these discussions as well as far as how to formulate the draft policy. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to just move forward to the next item, affordable housing policy. And I have about 53 slides. I'm going to go through them quickly. And I'm not going to show them to you because I'd be violating my own order to these guys to not use heavy text slideshows. So I'm just going to use my slides as my notes and throw out a couple graphics. Normally I would convert all my slides into something a little more refined. Fortunate time did not permit me to do so.
Does it mean about 53?
Well, I might have added 1 or 2, I don't know, I'm not sure where. That was the last count. All right, purposes of the discussion. One, to provide some additional background relative to the issue of affordable housing and low-income housing tax credits. Consider some of the work done so far in defining the problem, at least from my perspective, objectives, alternatives, and their consequences. Really responding to several council members' follow-up questions on this topic and asking for this topic to come back. The administration pursued a few leads, but desire to go a little bit deeper and not cut into their administration's other work has resulted in me working on this research and presentation. Ultimately, the purpose of this discussion is to not deliver answers, but to generate some discussion and determine the interests of the council where you want to focus priorities and additional research and time. Just a reminder might be helpful. I think me taking a lead in this research is appropriate in that my background as a city planner, also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, which credential I continue to keep up, was an important part of me being selected for this position. And so I hope that background will be recognized as that I have some expertise and interest in this area from my professional background. In addition, so let's just recap a few concepts. What is affordable housing? There's a lot of different definitions out there about low-income housing and affordable housing, and medium area income and medium family housing. The universal sort of definition, though, is affordable housing in general is when a household is paying no more than 30% of their gross housing costs, including taxes, utilities. And the fact is, most, well, not most, I don't have that exact number. There's a fair size, there's a sizable part of this nation which is paying well above 30%. That's a statistic I can go find if you need it. But, and so that's affordable housing in general. Are you keeping basically a balanced budget? And that your housing costs are not, your total sum of housing costs are not overwhelming other financial needs in your life. Now, of course, on an individual, that's a very broad standard to apply. Of course, individuals are, maybe they're okay with 40% because they don't need other things. For instance, I'm a one-car household. That saves me quite a bit of money, at least $5,000 to $10,000 a year. I can put that into housing, and it won't hurt my family. Other people are the opposite. You know, we think about people who live in Eagle Mountain, drive to qualify, and they think, yep, I've got my loan, the bank's approved it, I must be affordable, but they've forgotten that now they got to drive, in addition to the time cost, sometimes up to 100 miles a day or more to work. And that may be double with double income. And so they think they've got an affordable situation, and pretty soon their transportation costs, because of that affordable home, has gotten them into an unaffordable situation. Which is one of my hypotheses why Eagle Mountain has a higher bankruptcy rate than the rest of the county.
Can I ask a question? When you say affordable housing, you're talking based on the income of an individual. Is there a limit on the affordable housing as we think about it here as the council? I think often has to do with the value of the piece of property that you're purchasing. Is there a limit on that as well as to make it what we would call affordable?
What definition we would call for, is that an internal definition or the definition I'm using at 30%? Just 30% of your housing cost is the generally accepted term for affordable.
But somebody
housing.
could live in a $500,000 house and 30% of their income. So I'm just wondering what.
If that would be affordable housing for them. So it's relative to the individual household of affordable housing.
But as far as getting assistance, as far as affordable
Now,
housing,
that
is
gets us
that,
to the next
that's what I was wondering.
next point. HUD, for the purposes of administering grant programs, CDBG dollars, home fund dollars, probably several other federal programs, and these standards get adopted by the state and other agencies because of the universal language associated with these federal standards. They adopt affordability being as 80%, or and you have to use a formula to get to this point. If you start with defining, okay, what is the median income for the area? So again, this is getting your question: is a $500 million home affordable to somebody? Yes. Okay, is it affordable to the average or median household? Probably not. Okay, and in fact, definitely, it depends on the community. Okay, in our community, no. And so we define affordable housing for these federal programs as, first, let's establish the median area income. And in Utah County, that's for this year, and they evaluate this every year, it's $67,600 for a family of 4. And it varies depending on the household size, this number. But the family of 4 is the common standard that they usually refer to as the first statistical figure when talking about these things in general terms. So, and that's household income. So that's the median for whether you're a single income or double income. That's the median area income. Affordability is 80% of that area median income or less. So what a householder can afford to buy at 80% of the area median income. In Utah County, that's $54,100. In Provo, I don't have any RDA experts. Wayne, maybe you can help me. I'm pretty sure our RDA programs are based off the county median income, not median income for Provo.
That's correct.
Provo's actual median income would be a lot lower because of the student, especially because of the student housing component, but also our social service demographic also affects that.
Just mentioned too, different HUD programs use different numbers. For example, when we purchased the property associated with the NeighborWorks project in the Franklin neighborhood, right now that HUD program indicated that the housing had to be affordable to someone making 115% of median income in the county. And so again, that's if that were the case, then that number's somewhere in the vicinity of 75,000 a year. And so you take that times 30% and divide it by 12, and that gives you a rough idea of what rents would have to be at in order to sustain that family. And so again, the rents would be using low-income tax credits or other tools might be used to reduce that monthly rent so that it's affordable to an individual family. So again, that's just a rough rule of thumb. Somewhere between 80 and 120% is typically how HUD programs define the income associated with projects which they will provide subsidy for.
Now, I asserted 80% as a rule to qualify for some of these programs. So like some of the CDBG funds, home funds, have to be used for not necessarily affordable housing, but moderate to low income housing. That's right. Okay. So again, the distinction. And when we're communicating with the public, all these terms become sort of synonymous, but there are fine distinctions about what each of these mean. And I thank you for clarifying. Yes, affordable is at 80 to 115, roughly %. But many of the programs are dependent on 80% or less, which is, again, this 54,100 for the county. And of course, Provo, actual median income is probably lower. Low-income housing tax credits. My slide, I know it's got out of order here. So I skipped a few pages, that's what I did. Okay. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on these things. they are complicated little beasts, especially the financing part. It just sort of evades me. But basically, the investors that you obtain, many of these are banks, large banks, get a full tax credit for, not a deduction, but a full tax credit, dollar-to-dollar credit for every dollar they put into one of these projects, which can greatly reduce their tax liability. The easiest way for me to get it is it's like me getting the child tax credit. It's an after deduction tax credit. I get $1,000 per kid. Every baby I have gives me another $1,000, and it just completely reduces my tax liability for that amount of children I have. And it's the same type of principle. It's the best way I think we can communicate this idea to people that aren't immersed in this world, is just think about your child tax credit and what it does to your taxes. And that's essentially what low-income housing tax credits do. Now, the rules around them are a little bit different. They have two different rules. One's called the 2050 rule. At least 20% of the units must be rent restricted and occupied by households with incomes at or below 50% of area median income. So in Utah County, we'd be talking the 50% is $33,800. There's also a 40-60 rule where at least 40% of the units are to be rent restricted and occupied by households with incomes at or below 60% of AMI. I don't have an exact dollar amount for that one, but you can get the idea. Now, I've heard other things, and maybe people more experienced in this, that to make a project work, though, they're looking, and maybe under the rules of Utah Housing Corporation, the type of projects that qualify, they're not going to really look at projects less than 60% rent restricted units, and that's what we've seen so far. Projects resulting between 80 and 60% of the units being rent restricted using the low-income housing tax credit. Now, they work differently, a little bit differently than, say, a Section 8 housing voucher or other public housing type of initiative, where those are based upon your ability to pay. So if you make $10,000 a year, your neighbor might make $20,000 a year, and they're going to go through a calculation where you don't pay more than 30% of your annual income. That's not true for low-income housing tax credits. The low income is based upon area median income, and you can actually rent above that 30%, between 30. And there was a sort of a, I don't know if it wasn't a full national study, but a fairly comprehensive study of several states looking at the type of people that actually rent these units, and found that actually that even though they had to be in that affordable median income range or area median income range, those renters, a good majority, a sizable share or majority of them, actually were spending between 30 and 50% of their income on housing still. So the only reason I point that out is that they operate differently, and the person may be paying more than, they may not actually be technically affordable, even though they're subsidized, because you may be paying more than 30% of your income on rent. So,
What article was that?
I have it saved in my notes. I can get you the reference. I want to talk just a little bit about, and sorry, this is also background information. I do have some alternative approaches that you can consider about dealing with this situation we'll get to, but I think some more context around this issue may be helpful in deciding what's important to you as the council to do. Affordable housing and TOD, transit-oriented development. Many communities are experiencing rapid gentrification of their TOD areas. And if you don't know what gentrification is, typically what have been lower income, lower rent neighborhoods being bought or rental, occupied by up and coming or even higher income demographic, and has resulted in what were once low-income neighborhoods now have become unaffordable neighborhoods for that same demographic. Some of these people have experienced displacement, either because they can't find a new place to live in or to move up in, or maybe even their property taxes, depending on the property tax structure, have gone up so much that somebody on a fixed income can't afford to stay. I share that context that this is the current trend for many TOD areas. I don't know about all. I haven't done enough research to get in there. When I went to the American Planning Association conference this last month, I attended 4 or 5 affordable housing sessions. None of them were about what we've been talking about in increasing market rate housing. It was all about preserving or increasing affordable housing. Now, these communities range from areas like Boulder, Colorado to Seattle. So it's a whole range, and all depends on how much economic vitality is coming with these TOD areas. But we can already see, just in the short couple of years, that we have a development uptick and are possibly on a trend that one day these neighborhoods could become unaffordable. I don't know what the timeline is. I don't know if that's 5 or 40 years or 100 years, but we could see that. I haven't done enough number crunching analysis for my, just looking at information I've absorbed. Housing prices are on the rise. They're on the rise a little bit faster than some other areas of Provo, and not necessarily in the affordable range anymore. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This presents a chicken and the egg problem. Yeah, that's fine.
When you're using the term affordable housing right now regarding gentrification, we're talking about the 30% income general.
Talking about the general 30%. We do, and again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but our population is expected to also double in addition to the TOD interest, development interest. Expecting that to continue to put pressure and demand on these areas. Sort of a chicken and egg problem, because as things are currently, we have a high number of affordable units. We have a high number of social service clients. Those bring valid concerns. These concerns are not new. I mean, the 1999 general plan, I know it's been policy for at least 16 years, because when we updated it, this policy was already there, talking about the need for social service clients to reside near public transit or within walking distance of social service agency offices, places of employment. Shopping is acknowledged, yet there is a concern with concentrating special populations within a particular neighborhood and the possible inequitable burden placed on neighborhoods' residents as a result of this concentration of high-impact residents. So this is not a new dialogue. This has been going on at some level for quite some time. The reason I'm bringing up the TOD and gentrification issue is, although we're currently experiencing a disproportionate amount, there could be a reversal in that trend. And like I said, I don't know when that happened. And the only reason I'm bringing this is so we take a step back and hopefully look at this problem holistically, big picture, long term, and try and develop solutions that won't shoot ourselves in the foot as we look toward 20 years from now, we look back and wish, why did we do X? If we'd only thought. So, it's sort of a paradox. This is a quote. I have the citation in my notes. Rents go up as transit arrives. This pattern, actually, in some of our research, this has been going on ever since New York started building subways. As soon as a subway station opened, rents go up. and this was documented in 1918. I can find the quote. Often along new shops and restaurants, and more affluent people move in, and guess what? Those wealthier people tend to have more cars. That's the fundamental paradox. The people who are attracted to transit-rich neighborhoods and have the money to pay more to live there don't use transit as much as less affluent people who can get priced out. The challenge is to keep development around transit from becoming too exclusive and too car-oriented. How can communities do this? So, this is what some other communities are experiencing. But affordable housing also makes a lot of sense to have close to transit for the same reasons, and also keep affordability down. As you're a one-car family or zero-car family, you can keep your maybe afford more in housing.
Do you have examples of places that aren't so dense, like New York? I mean, of course,
sure.
It's great to live near transit in New York because you have to get around by subway if you want to get anywhere, fast. But
Yeah, I don't have a list I've compiled, but that's actually one of my recommendations at the end. If you want to continue researching this, that we would do some benchmarking with communities of sizable demographic and comparison and that. But just off the top of my head, Boulder, Colorado is in this situation, and they don't even have or light rail. They have some BRT and biking.
I'm just thinking of areas like New York. I mean, you have people commuting in
Sure.
from all over the place to work there. It's dense. It's really, we're not that. We're
Yeah,
not
most
dense.
actually.
We're not people commuting in from everywhere to work in Provo.
No, but again, I'm talking 50-year planning, looking to the future. What will the future hold? And looking at what other communities with transit of similar size to us. Sorry, some of the examples escape me off the top of my head. I can work on that list. But I've looked at this issue long enough to know that this is a real possibility for our community. And again, a time frame is it 20 years from now or 50 years from now? That would require a lot more analysis to try and look into that crystal ball.
It'd be nice to know what those factors are that bring the density and bring the desirability of living in the downtown, as opposed to having blight and having big cities with big city problems and blight in their downtown. It would be nice to know what those factors are that bring that desirability to live close to transit.
Sure.
To live.
I think Portland, although a much bigger city than us, they're in the 500,000 range. But I would probably put them as the poster child, probably as far as striking a good balance between a desirable urban place to live, even a place for families to live. It's probably a sizable minority. I wouldn't say it's definitely a majority of actual families living in their downtown. And a lot of that spurred by transit options. They have a pretty robust transit system. I would say another example that
It's beautiful with waterways and hills and
well,
it's beautiful.
Eugene, Oregon, it would probably be a good comparable to us. They have a BRT system, and looking at some of the developments that's occurring in their community. We were there last year. Definitely a lot of development interest. Some of that's associated with transit. I think we're seeing it right now right in Provo. We have at least 2 projects that are clearly driven by our front runner. That's Carson's Corner and Startup Crossing. I think if Nate Murray was here, he's talked to me several times of talking to other developers or other people that have developed and looking at expanding. Startup Crossing is looking at doing much. They developed their own master plan for the area because they are looking long term as a potential growth area for them and their business. The Carson's Corner developer is looking to do another project on the same block.
We have this across the street.
Yeah, so even though this is adjacent to the TOD, I think it's a factor as part of looking long term. 63 East, the community or the they're called the Old Chapel Apartments now, Harmon's House. I got a whole list that just goes on and on, that we're seeing a lot of development interest. I think some of it's directly correlated to transit. I think some is just a renewed interest in downtown urban living. And we're on a pretty aggressive trend as it is. I mean, you could just get the current growth rate, and if we actually accomplish some of the speculative projects that are floating around there, and we're talking probably what, 4,000, 5,000 units in the next 5 years.
It's not for the LDS Temple.
Yes, that is another factor.
Some relationship.
And I think there's definitely, as you get away from TOD, as we look at 63 East, we look at maybe what some other adjacent property owners are doing to the temple, yes, that's definitely driven by them, but in some ways it's also a combination of all those factors. You know, TOD plus temple plus downtown interest is sort of creating a perfect storm in a good way for downtown redevelopment in Provo. So
I think in some ways the development of Brasas Grill is a bellwether.
you know, that's a good indicator too. I mean, when you have businesses taking a risk on a dilapidated piece of garbage and investing money into it, you know, these are the type of, what do they call them, urban frontiersmen that are really the catalyst to a lot more of this type of development. So,
are there comparisons for downtown living to between rental and homeownership, and what that does to a downtown area when you have these dense buildings? Does that make a difference, homeownership versus renting?
You left home ownership a long time ago, and I was curious about that turn. You've just been talking about rentals since then.
Well, I don't know if I meant rent. I wasn't trying to imply anything particular with that.
And I mean, and I'm not necessarily like single homes, but
yeah,
if they buy a condo or buy one of the
condos,
63 East units, or as opposed to renting those out, is there a difference between those who are owner, you know, if they own them, and those that?
As far as effect on the urban quality?
Yeah.
I'd have to study that more. You know, there's some of these areas that have really taken off with the urban living. I think you have a healthy mix of both, and there's quite, you know, look at some of these things, quite a few apartments, and there's also quite a few of condos for sale. Even right now in Provo, Carson's Corner was a for sale product. I don't know if they changed direction, but they were, when they originally came online, they were pricing condos out at between 200 and 240,000. These are not big units. These are definitely outside or at the upper limits of the affordability range. For your area median income demographic. The rents with these apartment rentals, the ones that are not subsidized by low-income tax credits and other things, I've only hit a few of them. I hit 3 of them. I intend on getting more data behind this, but they're all renting at the upper end of the affordable spectrum or outside of it. So rental doesn't necessarily mean low income, even in Provo. I told a few people what these, you know, 1,000 square foot units are selling for and actually being bought for, and people's eyes are, you're kidding me. Why would you pay that much to live in a condo? It's a different trend, it's a different demographic, we're looking for a different experience. Nathan talked about experiential shopping. There's a big move, well, not a big move, in trying to understand the millennial demographic. I like to consider myself on the tail end of Generation X, but as I study myself, I probably identify somewhat with some of the millennial demographic, in that there's more and more emphasis on experiences rather than buying things or accumulation of wealth. And so you don't need as much space. That's secondary concern for many of these people. It's about being close to amenities, services, experiences, and putting your money, rather than putting it to rent in a bigger place, into going places or going out to eat or going shopping, as Nathan was talking about. So we're seeing some definitely trends. Now, one of the sessions I went to, it raised an interesting thought in this last conference. It's about schools and the millennials and in urban environments. And very interesting. I'll come back another time and talk about it if you want. But one of the points they made, well, what's going to happen to these trends when the millennials start having more kids? And what will schools and the quality of schools do to them? Because maybe they're okay living in an urban environment, but they still highly value education, because many of them have high education. And will the quality of the school affect whether they stay or go? So that's another piece of this puzzle that enter in a dialogue with the school board. I think where the council is or the city is these are trends in motion. The market and the demographics are going to move forward, but what can you do to influence those trends and demographics to produce outcomes that you want as a city? Let me just pass this out. Just a little bit more on low-income housing tax credits. This is one of the few slides with pictures. Okay, low-income tax credits are not density, nor serve one demographic. So if we talk about low-income housing tax credits, we're not talking about density. Both three of these are from Provo. I was quickly putting this together. This other one's from Denver. But we have historic rehab, senior condos. There's townhome projects that utilize these. There's the startup crossing that's utilizing these. We have single-family homes. We have probably at least a dozen, 12 to 20 single-family homes that have specifically used low-income housing tax credits. 4 of them very recently that were just opened last year on 5th South and 5th West. And that was part of the strategy to sort of bail out that property from the HUD coming in and saying, you're out of compliance and we need our money back. And we partnered with the Provo Housing Authority. They were able to utilize some of these low-income housing tax credits to get a project underway that would help us from not being penalized. Brought in 4 new families into that neighborhood. Now there's 2 more to be under construction by Habitat for Humanity, utilizing the same program. I asked the question. I think there's a lot of gut reaction when we talk about low-income housing and subsidized housing, and I'm guilty of it. I think too, as everyone might be. Sometimes, though, I try and just take a step back and just be objective, and that's the point of this discussion. I'm not saying I have landed in on myself as well, nor should you. But should we worry is the question. One, there's limited funding and high demand for the credits. So they're allocated at $2.15 per resident. Utah had 2.7 million population. There's about $6.6 million pool. I think there's about 20 projects that were awarded. I don't know about the whole number of applications. They're divided up. It's competitive. With this growth, as you take front runner up, you're seeing a lot of growth around the Murray stations. I'm starting to see growth around Sandy stations, Farmington. I think we'll just see more and more. Now, Lehigh and American Fork seem a little slow to add housing components, or at least get them underway. And I'm not sure if that's just market conditions or if they have some type of regulatory bias against their TOD areas as hurdles, making hurdles. So that would require a little bit more of a study to understand what's really happening at those TOD stations. We were talking a little bit about...
You mentioned those 2 places. You say a little more study, but when you look where those things are, that ground becomes very expensive, doesn't it? Right where
Or the TOD.
where the TOD is at Thanksgiving Point and those type of places.
Yeah, you know, well, one, Thanksgiving Point seems, the Lehigh Station seems to have focused most of their zoning and development into employment, so not housing. I can't say 100% sure. There's several vacant pieces still around the TOD, and I'm not sure if they have that plan for just more commercial or mixed use or residential. Now, there's some single family on the west side of the tracks. It doesn't strike me that those would be low-income housing tax credit projects. I was just saying that to understand if there's going to be more use of these credits at that station, I'd have to start talking to people at Lehigh. Same with American Fork. It's pretty much just a green pasture now. But definitely TOD, I'm sure, has raised property values there.
I think it's important to note too, particularly as you think about the front runner, the rail corridor through that area, and I mean through all of the county, has traditionally been, you backed up industrial kinds of uses to the train tracks because they were undesirable. People didn't want to be there. The moment you put commuter trains in there, it changed the entire dynamic. And so one of the things you find is that these low-income tax credits, as Matt may have indicated, typically have to go into targeted neighborhoods. They have to go into neighborhoods where it's already a depressed income situation, and we have more of those than many other cities in the county do. And again, ours have tended to be sort of centered around the railroad. That's been kind of the nature of how housing's developed. It's been in less desirable areas, mostly industrial and commercial, where housing was almost an afterthought. And so a lot of these low-income tax credits that are coming into the TOD area are not just being driven by commuter rail, but also by sort of the opportunity to redevelop and some lower baseline values that have made it a little more attractive. So again, there are a number of market forces, I think, at work as we think about the front runner. As you lay new rail lines and you think about tracks, for example, and now you're seeing a lot of that development. Think about West Valley, for example, and as the tracks line has gone into West Valley, what used to be mostly retail and office, you now are beginning to see residential pop up around the stations and the light rail line. And so again, I think it's a little different, but I wouldn't assume that what you see happening along Front Runner is really a microcosm of your traditional transit-oriented development. It's again because it's been in areas where the freight lines already existed and have for decades.
I'm not sure, though, that they have to use the tax credit in depressed areas. You know more about that?
Yeah.
It wasn't my impression that they could be used in a variety of places, but that's just something I'll follow up on, too. I think that will affect maybe some policy if we have a dialogue with town housing.
Can I interject something for you to have these? They should be watching what Vineyard's doing, because Vineyard's moving their entire city center to a TOD. They're building their whole new city center library, everything, and Front Runner will go between that walkable downtown and UVU. And it's a very interesting study. They were expecting about 30,000 people within the next 3 years there.
Yeah, and that just supports this idea that there, I have a quote elsewhere I'll share, but there is a really huge demand. Vineyard has a unique opportunity. They get to scrape the ground, basically, and start over with their TOD, and they can center their station, the heart. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if Front Runner stopped at the intersection? I mean, underground. I wouldn't put them on the street. If you could build a subway and put them underground at the heart of Provo, that'd be a pretty incredible opportunity. Not gonna happen. We're gonna run out of time, and I really want to get on to some of the options. I just want to give a little more context. Defining the problem, I think, is really important, and I think it's a big part of future dialogues. Really define the problem. If you aren't working on the right problem, you're always going to come up with the wrong solutions. So, and we at the council need to clearly have a good sense of what the problem is that you're trying to tackle. Some of my theories, based off what I've heard this discussion here, be Is, and also reiterating that general plan statement I read, side feeling of disproportionate share. And how do we achieve the right balance? I think we can spend more time on that, but let me throw out a few alternatives. But just on that, I think that's a gut feeling, but we're not quite always able to articulate maybe why that's a problem, to have over-concentration. Let me read a quote. This is Andreas Tawani. He is easily arguably the leader in the new urbanist movement, highly regarded, if you don't know much about him, but those fields of planning, architecture, city design. He says this: there is an additional difficulty. The provision of affordable housing today is vehemently opposed by the middle class. Is this simple prejudice? Is it fear or crime? In fact, there is a statistical basis for the relationship between crime and poverty. So it is difficult to deny those who fear affordable housing are just categorically prejudiced. In fact, it is necessary first step to acknowledge that the manner in which affordable housing is provided causes problems. If it is done as has usually been done, or as usually been the case in very large groupings, or boulders, then the opposition is not wrong in their fears. Affordable housing, to be socially sustainable, must be provided in smaller increments. 10% is his standard. I don't know if that's the right number. Is a good rule. Imagine, but I think it's a good way to imagine this. Imagine only 2 townhouses among 20 others, and you can deduce that this is imperceptible, particularly if the buildings are indistinguishable in architectural syntax from middle-class housing. Let me just read a little bit more from him on this issue. This round out what he means by design, grouping, concentration. Can anything be done to prevent gentrification, where we get the opposite problem? That's what he was really addressing in this article, but he's going to flip it here in a second. Yes, there is one proven, if craven, technique that's effective in holding down prices, is to give people bad design. As gentrification is essentially the value of real estate seeking its proper level, most places that gentrify are good enough for the gentry. Places that resist gentrification are those where the housing is of poor design or the quality of the urban space mediocre. So the most certain technique for permanently preventing gentrification is to provide dismal architecture and urban design. This is not facetious. The federal government inadvertently tested this effect in the process of providing affordable housing at 2 distinct periods. One was during the First World War, when the U.S. Housing Corp built 55 projects in cities where they expanded, but the expanded defense industry required it. This housing, while inexpensive, consisted of traditional houses and row homes skillfully designed by first-rate architects. Today, most of it is still in good shape, much of it having gentrified over the years. This is in stark contrast to the second model, the housing that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development produced in the 1960s. Now, boulders was produced in 1972. It's at the tail end of this period. But actually, as I've studied this a little bit more, and it's a conclusion I should have readily come to the forefront of my brain. Much of the yes, there are some demographic and issues and concentration issues that I think are enhanced by poor design. And from the planning thought today is the Boulder is a pretty horrendous community in urban design. Let me continue on here. The time of the 1960s was designed along the then fashionable socialist models that our modernist architects so admired in Europe. Most of it soon decayed and persists in remaining so, despite multiple renovations over the years. For the record, it has fared just as badly in Europe. It was clearly not the fault of HUD, but of the architects who advised them. Some of these projects were torn down within 15 years of being completed. I don't know if you know about Pruitt. I think it's pronounced Ego. Or, that's a fascinating case study in bad public housing. But many of the U.S. public housing designed on modernist architectural principles, and there's a lot. We have a 2-hour discussion on why those architectural principles reinforced demographic and social inequity and other problems. A side-by-side comparison of this phenomenon is provided by the pair of housing projects called Seatview in Bridgeport, Connecticut. One today is a delightful little village about 80 years old in perfect condition. The other, barrack-like, is less than 30 years old, despite being less than a decade away from its last renovation, is again trashed. I've witnessed this in New Orleans on my mission. Experimental modernist design is indeed a proven technique for keeping housing in the hands of the poor. Fortunately, the newly highly successful HUD program called Hope 6. Now, HUD studied this and said, okay, we've made some big errors in how we're designing our projects. They developed a new project, Hope 6, which took a lot of these new urbanist principles. They actually tore down tons of their housing, infused it with a mix of market rate housing, and renovated or newly built subsidized housing, because that's part of their mission still. These projects have been pretty successful. We could go into some case studies there. One more quote, Jane Jacobs, if you don't know who she is, this is about design, but she wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. It's a central planning book. I'm going to skip that one. There's a good quote I'll email to you. But it's about eyes on the street, which eventually results in the development of CEPTED principles, crime prevention through environmental design. And the whole point of my designing this is design can influence a lot of the problems we're seeing with affordable or low-income housing. And that brings me to a few more principles. Another principle is resilience in housing stock. If you know about the bark beetle infestation in Canada, we have a monoculture ecosystem of pines. And I don't know exact conifers. I don't know exactly what breed or variety. Breed probably the wrong term. Bark beetle comes in, wipes out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres. The whole ecosystem collapses because of this one infestation. You can see that pattern time and time again when you have over-relied on one type of housing type in a development. When there's the beginning of an infestation, and whatever that infestation might be, too many rentals or lack of care, you start seeing one house after the other fall to the same symptoms until the whole neighborhood has changed character and issues. And so there is an idea about resilience or diversity in housing, not to create a monoculture and try and develop your neighborhoods, that if one segment is experiencing troubles, there's about 80 to 90% of other types of housing that's not going to be affected by that same problem. This is a smart growth strategy endorsed by the American Planning Association. I have the quote, I won't read it because we've done enough quotes. Somehow the slides got it. All right. I won't read the policies, but there are several Vision 2030 statements and general plan statements that support this discussion. I read one. One particular from Vision 2030, maintain and encourage good quality, sustainable housing and infill developments. Encourage owner-occupancy or long-term residency, but bring healthy and balanced neighborhoods. So a lot of interpretation can go into that, but okay, what can we do? Land use regulation. We have zoning at our disposal. Now the question has come up, can we just prohibit low-income housing tax credits? Brian and I have talked about it quite a bit. We could probably have a long discussion about maybe, but I have seen no examples of it, and I don't believe it's expressly the intent of the state enabling statute, land use regulation. The regulation says that you have the power to establish ordinances, resolution rules, basically your zoning title, to govern uses density, open space, structures, buildings, energy efficiency, light, air quality, transportation, public transportation, infrastructure, street or building orientation, width requirements, public facilities, fundamental fairness and land use regulation, considerations of surrounding land use, and balance of the foregoing purposes with a landowner's private property interests, height and location of vegetation, trees, landscaping, unless expressly prohibited by law. Fortunately, financing mechanisms, well, unfortunately, just financing mechanisms is not in that list. Just like the manner in which property ownership is not in that list. And it would be for us to regulate what areas the city could use particular types of financing is probably not within the intent of your enabling statute to regulate. A good example would be VA loans. So it would be like saying, well, only this area of town can do VA loans, and we're going to prohibit them from this area. Just don't do that. It's also like property ownership where, well, we're going to prohibit a corporation from owning these parcels versus a joint partnership of a husband and wife. That's not an area of control that our zoning gets into. Now, that doesn't say that we can't influence the use of low-income housing.
Well, can't we still limit, couldn't we say you can use tax credits, but only at 10% for X number of years?
I don't think so, because that, in a way, creates prohibition on the other 90%.
Well, not because we have it in all these other, we have 80% at Startup Crossing, right? We have these other.
Those are not numbers that we dictate.
But in aggregate, we have this demographic. So is there any way for future projects we could say you can have tax credits, but you can use this percentage and no more for X number of years until we reevaluate the total aggregate of what we have in this type of housing to maintain a balance of housing, of different types of housing?
I don't think you can flat out regulate the tax credit. I think you can regulate the type of housing and the percentages of housing that you permit in the zone and the ratios of housing that you permit in the zone. I don't believe you can regulate the financing mechanisms to get those bids.
In order to do that, we'd have to take away the ITOD and then start over, right?
Not necessarily, but I'm throwing out some
Okay, sorry.
some possibilities of
Okay.
looking at the zoning code and typically zoning has been exclusionary in many instances. And when you say a particular area is only 10,000 square foot lots and the homes have to be 1,400 square feet and bigger. So say to regulate housing size and type and area is about the most firm historical precedent zoning you can get. That's also to housing advocates. One of the main things they work against is exclusionary zoning. Is say you can only do this or this or this here. However, I believe you could diversify the requirements for housing types in any area. Okay, whether it's a single-family area or a higher density area, you can probably require a ratio mix of square footage per unit. So, so many of the units have to be 500, 1,000, 1,500 square feet. You could require an average square footage. There's a little more discretion of how they divvy that up.
Is that an average in an area or in a
project?
In a project.
Probably in a project. We could look at area, but that would get a little complicated. I'd have to explore that idea. Density bonuses is one way that most communities influence the awarding or the development of affordable housing. So when they have an affordable housing shortage, they will offer density bonuses per the zoning code if the developer grants a certain ratio of affordable housing. I didn't see a lot of examples of this, but I think you can turn that on its head and say we reward density bonuses for a certain amount of market rate housing. Could be an option. This is usually generally referred to as a performance zoning type of tool, where if you meet certain standards, you have more density in your development. And it's not just necessarily a market rate. You know, since most performance zoning may focus on landscaping or amenities or things that they bring to the neighborhood. But market rate housing could easily be justified as a public interest of the public welfare, and could be you could reward the inclusion of market rate housing in developments with density bonuses. You could also look into parking regulations. That's a very high cost to developers as another type of bonus mechanism, but that has some complication because of the location and transit rules. We're running out of time. I know Mr. Garrett would like to move on. I won't talk about many of these. Let's schedule a follow-up to this discussion. Let me just hit the bullet points. You could look at diversity. We already mentioned the diversity requirements. The diversity is not just maybe unit size, but also housing types. Maybe requiring more of a mix of housing types: duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, live-work units. And again, this idea of creating diversity in the neighborhood, so it isn't all one type of demographic or one type of person in the neighborhood, and to avoid that concentration problem. Okay. There is
the same income requirements apply to each housing type, though, necessarily?
If it's market rate housing, it wouldn't. The only time you're going to limit the rent is whether it's a low-income housing tax project or some other HUD-type program project. So if you're developing incentives to develop market rate housing, or you develop your zoning codes in a way that encourages more market rate housing through allowing these other options in the neighborhood, achieves multiple goals: more market rate housing, more diversity in the housing stock, less concentration of one demographic group. So it's a multifaceted type of. You can carefully evaluate the zoning criteria. Is the zoning criteria producing the type of developments that we want? Again, Andreas Dewani's assertion was it's not necessarily always just the concentration, but also concentration combined with bad design. So do we have adequate design standards? Are the projects that are being produced meeting the objectives? And we have a few coming online. So I've already talked to Gary McGinn a little bit about going through an evaluation process on not just TOD, but the downtown zoning, and looking at the projects that are coming online and seeing where there is room for improvement and adjusting our codes accordingly. Monetary incentives. You can look into using your redevelopment funds and other funding sources to help offset development costs and therefore make the low-income housing tax credit less desirable. If they have other sources of assistance that are not rent restricted. RDA policies, that's an easy one to get your arms around. Just you can make policies about how you will interact with low-income housing tax credit or other subsidized type of housing projects. Maybe you have a policy that says we won't participate in those projects. That certainly could be a big influence whether somebody uses that credit or not. You may not want to go that extreme because, again, there may be times that they're appropriately used. You may want to have a policy that say, well, we support projects that have 20 to 40% subsidized, but we're not going to participate in anything beyond that. So I think some dialogue about your RDA policies and when you participate in projects is a valid discussion. I've heard Mr. Walter for a lot of input on that. But another option is regional planning. I think if the council wants to move forward and really develop some policies and procedures. Not only should the council adopt maybe an intent statement, but it would be helpful to have at least 1 or 2 council members that really champion this issue, that could partner with the mayor and enter into a dialogue with the Mountain Land Association of Governments, Wasatch Front Regional Council, Utah Housing Corporation, and and the other cities where these developments could be dispersed, and come up with some regional strategies to help that, especially influencing the way that Utah Housing Corporation awards these credits. They do it on a bonus point system. In fact, I need to get you some information. Their public comment period ends this week, which I just found out about, I'm sorry, on input on how they'll develop next year's set of criteria. But even if we miss that window, I think it's a good time to just start the dialogue and be ready for next year. Because they do this on an annual basis.
Matt mentioned to me that a lot of those agencies they're fighting a whole different type of situations in other cities than they are in Provo. And they don't get what we're dealing with here in many areas. And so I think that that's a critical thing to help them understand. As they came to us and talked to about this, why are you wanting to limit?
I asked Bryce to call them, and I forget the name of who we talked with, but it was clear impression to Bryce that they didn't fully understand some of the concerns. And most places would be so happy to get this investment in their community. And I think that's a true statement. I mean, investment's great, but again, there's a little bit more competing factors, competing objectives.
Well, there's just consequences, and maybe unintended consequences.
And sometimes the professionals get, so into their profession, they don't sometimes pay attention to all the other complicated objectives that they're interested in providing affordable housing. Okay, there are some national new. I mentioned the Hope 6 project. There's a new project, federal initiative called Choice Neighborhoods. I think it warrants some study of their successes and failures, whether there's a choice. There's also actually some federal grants to the Choice Neighborhood program could be applied for planning efforts and also redevelopment efforts. We could talk about that more. It's just an opportunity, even if we didn't utilize any of their money, to look at their successes, failures, and see if any of that's replicatable here. So there may be unintended consequences, and I think whatever the council should do should try and keep an eye to the future and ask the questions of unintended consequences, develop a balanced approach. Finally, I would just look for feedback from you. If you want to continue this dialogue, delve into it more, delve into specific parts of this topic more. That's what I need to hear, so we know where to allocate the research time. If you are interested in moving forward, some of the things we specifically would do is probably do some continued research defining the problem, looking at census data, looking at other data sources to really validate what the problem is, maybe some surveys, and trying to determine, okay, research into what is an appropriate housing balance mix, what are the benchmarking equivalents of other cities in our situation, what are they experiencing, and begin that dialogue with regional partners. So I turn to you to say, in the interest of time, if you just want to make a motion to talk to me directly about this, or if you want to identify something you want me to focus on right here, here and now, or to continue this discussion on the next work session. It's up to you.
Well, Matt, that was excellent research and very helpful to outline that for us that way. We can email comments, input, questions. I don't know if there's a comment or question or two at this point that we'd like to entertain.
I'd like to see where everybody's at with this, because this is something that's really important to me. Raised the question with Matt and asked him to do this because we feel like this was important, and it was important enough that we put all housing kind of on hold for a while. And I feel like we need to have a motion or something to move this forward, to continue to work on it. And I'd be happy to work with the mayor and MAG and Wasatch Front, and I'd be happy to be one of those to work on this. But I feel like this is going to require a lot more work to figure out.
I think that's just one piece of the puzzle. I think there's a lot of council work on this issue.
Yeah, and I think being able to come up with some policy that we can bring back to the council for the council to look at, I think is really important to keep this moving forward and to not allow it just to sort of evaporate until we find ourselves in another situation where we're faced with something that's undesirable. So I'm not sure exactly what that motion sounds like, but I would move that we move in that direction, that we do partner with these groups that he mentioned, that we look for legislation that would help address some of the issues, and not just and I guess not just disperse this type of housing throughout the city, but throughout the county and other places as well, that we don't have a fixed concentration, that we don't aggregate it all in one area. Or that we at least study it out to see what the consequences are, the long-term consequences of having this type of housing aggregated in the downtown, area, and what that would bring. And you had mentioned there's maybe some positives, I don't know there, but I think we need to flesh this out.
Yeah, there's a lot here to consider, a lot to digest. Maybe a task force of council members, of 2 or 3 council members, would be helpful to kind of get arms around some of these options that Matt has identified. We could certainly, there are those who would be willing to participate in that now. That could be part of a motion as well. Mr. Sewell, I'd be happy to participate in that.
If there's a motion to that effect, I would suggest that it include an invitation to the administration to participate in that.
Okay.
They'll be critical to being along on this journey and ride, so that when you make decisions, that they're there with you and able to execute them.
Gary, did you have a comment?
Well, I was really interested in looking at the land use issues as far as bonuses for diversity in housing and working with community development, and your planning planning and your planning expertise in appropriate mixes of housing is something that I'd be really interested in looking at.
I favor your initial recommendation that members of the council forward to Matt impressions from today's presentation, as well as considerations made previously and those yet to come. I think before the council appoints a subcommittee, it's very important for the council to determine just exactly what it wants to achieve. Mm-hmm. And here, as with our budgetary study of direct and indirect costs, we find that when we scratch a little bit, there's an enormous complexity that opens.
Right. Yeah.
And given that, it's all the more important for us to be definitive about what we expect the study by subcommittee or otherwise
and then
to produce.
Perhaps part of that feedback to the director could be a willingness to participate in a subcommittee task force.
By all means.
What if I suggest, if I get your feedback and promising not to take this much time next time, report it back to you at work session, and maybe just focus on having the council define the problem and make a motion. This is the problem we're trying to address have the subcommittee addressed, so that everybody's on the same page. Would that be acceptable?
Our work session by the 19th.
Yeah, I think if you give me your feedback and I can assimilate that into a few statements, making sure I have that ready for distribution before the meeting, that week and before, and you'd be prepared to say, yes, this is the problem we're trying to address, or no, here's my input on how we need to amend that.
Okay. I think 2 weeks would be a reasonable amount of time.
And so you'll need that in 1 week, though. You'll need it in 1 week.
You will get my feedback within 1 week.
Okay. Do we need a motion then for that, or?
It's up to you.
Okay.
I don't think so. That's
Let's plan to get Matt feedback then within the next week based on his presentation.
I will send out these notes.
Okay.
Just forgive any.
And again, feel free to express a willingness to serve on a task force, and then we'll come back with a condensed summary presentation in our next meeting. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate your joining us here. Our next item is related to the new Utah Lake Commission, a new executive director who has been appointed, Eric Ellis. And we'd like to welcome you, Mr. Ellis, and turn some time over to you to present.
Thank you. Mayor and Council, thanks for having me here today. I really just wanted to take a couple minutes to introduce myself, talk a little bit about what the Commission is doing right now, and then also give any of you an opportunity to give some ideas or project ideas that you have that you'd like to see down there that we might be able to pursue. Right now, as far as how connected is everybody with what's happening down at the lake? Would a short meaning 2-minute report be helpful?
I think so. And then preface that, if you could, Mr. Ellis, with maybe an introduction to yourself and
Sure.
your recent appointment.
Yeah.
Maybe a history of your background.
Okay. As background on myself, I did my undergraduate here in Utah Valley at BYU in marketing, and then went on to complete a public administration graduate degree up at the U. I worked with Salt Lake City for a short time interning there, and then went up to work with the state up in the governor's office, working for the lieutenant governor then, Greg Bell. So I worked with him for a little while, and then he had me become his advisor. And about the time that he was stepping down, I found a really nice spot over in the Department of Natural Resources. And in there I did this unique thing working on sage grouse. It sounds like something that should be hidden in the corner, but amazingly it's a top priority, not just for Utah, but for many of the western states. And so that has been the big push for the last few years, pulling together plans to show that the states can manage those effectively and support them. And just, I think 2 days ago, legislation made it at least through the Military Appropriation Board that is going to put a delay on it, which is really nice for the states. 10 years to demonstrate that we know how to do it. So I can say that there was completion, or at least a level of completion there when I stepped out. And now I'm really excited to take on the Utah Lake issues. I know that there's lots and it's complicated, and there's been years and years of efforts to improve the lake, improve the image of the lake, and I hope to be able to take that even more in the right direction. Right now, there's quite a few things happening down at the lake. The Utah Lake, or the Utah Beach down at the state park, is moving along. There's a consultant firm that has been hired largely by Provo City and others. And here in the next couple of weeks, they've invited us to come down to Tempe, Arizona to look at some of the projects that they've done down there with trails and a nature center and a number of other ideas that are similar to what we're hoping to have down at the lake. I'll have a report on that as soon as we can arrange with the right people to get down there. The trail system is another big priority. There's numerous trails that have been completed, but what we're hoping to do is connect a lot of those. The top priority right now is to finish the loop and kind of connect a number of the trails that spike in close to the lake, so that we'll be able to come down the Provo River Trail, head up along the lake,
connect onto the Murdoch Canal Trail system and the Saratoga Springs Trail system, so that there will be quite an extensive transportation system for bikes. In addition to that, the more long-term plan would be to finish a trail system that goes around the entire lake. I think that would be a phenomenal economic driver for races and cycling in the county. It would be approximately 75 miles long, so we could do centurions, and it would be a pretty neat thing. When I've looked throughout the states, there's not a lot of systems like that have both beauty and a contiguous trail loop. So it's something that I think would be a really neat addition to the valley. Phragmites is another big push, getting rid of the Phragmites. I just met this morning with the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and they now have additional funding and are excited about assisting in that effort. They've been looking at contracting and increasing their efforts there, so we should have a much greater effort and completion rate on knocking down Phragmites and keeping it down moving forward. The CARP project, that's also moving ahead well. We're almost 60% of the goal that was set out in the master plan, and as you know, the environmental impact statement, the final environmental impact statement for June Sucker was recently released, and so they'll be able to start working on developing that Provo River Delta and the additional options that come with that, like a sport fishery just below that and between that and the lake, and making sure that the June Sucker is a sustainable species in the lake will be helpful towards either bumping it up a level to threatened and or getting it right off of the endangered species list. The water level this year, as you know, is not great. We're at about 3.5 feet below compromise right now, and it's predicted that it'll stay there for a while. There's some water rights that are being used to at least maintain that for now. And depending on what the summer looks like, it's hard to predict exactly where we'll end up with at the end of the summer, but certainly not where we'd like it to be. We'll hope for a nice heavy winter this coming winter. The Utah Lake Festival is on the 6th of June from 10 to 2. We've already started our planning meetings for that. It looks like it'll be a great success this year. We hope that we'll see many of you down there. And we've already done 2 days of the 4 days that we are hosting field trips for 4th graders. So we've had about 600 students down there. It's been a phenomenal success. We've had some really awesome reports from some of the teachers. And we hope that the weather holds for the next 2 days. So tomorrow, if any of you are interested, it'll be the media day. We start at 9:40 and go until about 2 o'clock. And we'll have media members that we've invited down there throughout the day. We invited the governing board of the Utah Lake Commission as well. Some of them we predict will be there as well. And then Thursday will be the final day of that. That's my report. If I'm open for questions or ideas or suggestions.
I have a question. With Utah Lake, is that a Utah State Natural Resources? Provo owns part of it, all of it? Who has the total say on the lake?
The bed of the lake is owned by the state.
Okay.
So it's a sovereign piece of land.
Okay.
The resource of it benefits Provo. Mayor, do you know how you would claim ownership of the lake, aside from the fact that it's within your city boundaries?
Of course, we claim everything.
Is it boundaries for the city?
We have actually a rather small lake frontage compared to some of the other cities that are much smaller than we are. We have the airport that borders the lake, and then there's a piece of property called the Despain property.
Right.
The state park in between them, and those 3 pieces are the main border we have of the lake. The park is owned 100% by the state, and the discussions that you mentioned about the park might end up in some type of a joint relationship with the state, but that's yet to be determined.
One other thing that is in the works, and slated to take place next year is that they'll be installing a cable park for wakeboarding in the outer harbor of the state park. I think that that will be quite a phenomenal draw for students and adults throughout the valley. It's the first one in the state. I know that they're very popular on the East Coast, where, especially southern East Coast, where it's warm. But I think that that'll be a pretty neat addition to the park.
I have one other question. With the lake, with studies that have been done, they said it has the same footprint as Bear Lake, but Bear Lake is like 10 times deeper because usually lake is so shallow, it has the wind pick up the water and cause havoc for people on the water. Is there any possibility down the road of looking at deepening the lake so the water doesn't move as heavily when the wind blows across it, or is that just?
It's not an overly feasible goal. We've looked at it. It would be over $1 billion to have a substantial dredging on the entire lake. However, monies have been secured for dredging some of the bays, and so that'll be taking place shortly as well. And even just the bay down here, it's $1 million plus just to do a little area like that, and then kind of a canal out through the.
It'd be very beneficial.
Agreed.
Phragmites, is that an eradication or a control?
It is a control.
We'll never be able to eradicate it. And the other question, up at Deer Creek, what are they? What's the critter that they're experiencing? Is it
quagga mussels?
Quagga mussels. How's that down here? Do we have any
We
deal?
don't have any reported villagers. They're just a microscopic level right now up in Deer Creek, and we hope that won't be the case. But they can travel down the river, so we're hoping to stop it where it is in Deer Creek so that it doesn't continue to happen. And by we, I don't mean the Division of Wildlife Resources is pursuing that and doing everything they can to prevent it. They've set up stations and have funding in place to decontaminate boats. They'll be doing that at the various lakes, Utah Lake being one of those at the state park.
Can you discuss briefly the implications of the arrival of the final environmental audit for the June sucker? And then I'm curious to know why you have successfully avoided any mention of causeway.
So the final environmental impact statement, we're awaiting the record of decision to be published. The likely outcome is that they go with the word escapes me, the preferred alternative, which will be to just a little ways up, I think right by Lake Shore, they'll divert the river, and they'll create the delta out there. Funding and implementation of that takes place at a federal level with local input. They've worked with all interested parties to kind of find a compromise so that it'll avoid problems with the airport, so that it'll have the greatest impact for the likelihood of success for June sucker, and then also developing a sport fishery section below that diversion and assuring that certain water levels continue to flow through there so that it stays, so that it doesn't become stagnant. They'll also include aeration, like a station throughout there where they're needed to aerate that water so that it'll actually be healthier water than it is right now. So right now it's somewhat like a pond because it's level with the level of the lake for quite a ways up there. Why did I not mention the causeway or bridge? For no particular reason. I don't have anything against it per se. As I've listened to a number of people discuss it, it seems like an interesting and feasible plan sometime down the road when the population and can sustain the expense of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in mitigating concerns with the airport, are they still planning on shutting down the park and getting rid of the birds occasionally, is that still part of that mitigation, or have they come up with something
I
different?
think what they did is they moved it farther north.
So they want me to do that?
Yeah, but I'm not certain that they weren't planning on shutting certain portions down. I'm not 100% understanding all of the implications of it. We're waiting till they publish that record of decision so that we can review that, figure
Whose
out what's.
property was that moved to? Do you know what properties were affected by moving it further north?
I'm not sure who they belong to, but they're, right now, during this implementation stage, they'll have to acquire all of those pieces of property, so.
Multiple owners.
Multiple landowners, yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
With the health of the lakes, since the early days, they started just dumping everything into the lake, and the Geneva was there, and it is a flat, stagnant lake. And what is the water quality out there, like for recreating and people being in it, and how is it improved? And so it's not a health issue, or
Well, first off, I wouldn't refer to the lake as being stagnant per se.
Okay.
There's multiple sources coming in and there's water feeding out. It's more in that one portion of the river that oxygen levels go down for a number of reasons. Overall, the quality of the water is great. It continues to look murky for a number of reasons. Because it's shallow, when the wind blows, it stirs it up. And also the carp that eat all of the vegetation off the bottom, that also contributes to the fact that it's very difficult to maintain a stable lake bed. So we're hopeful that completing the heavy carp removal and then going into maintenance mode will allow some of that vegetation to come back and increase the water clarity. But as far as typical pollutants coming from the wastewater treatment facilities, they're very clean. There is a level of nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, that are a little bit higher than we might like. And we're going to look into that and work with the Division of Water Quality to see if any adjustments need to be made on that.
What was it that caused the concern last year? Were people getting in the lake and in the water? What was that? They said, don't do that in the paper. What was
So there was an algae bloom.
the algae bloom? That's all.
So cyanobacteria is what happens when sunlight and the right temperature and the right nutrients all happen at the same time. It's been happening periodically for years and years, and it happens in lakes throughout the West. It doesn't happen throughout the whole lake. It just happens in localized areas that happen to fit all of those requirements. And that the notices that went out, if it were to happen again, we would do something similar. The algae itself can be a toxin, and thus there was concern that it contributed to the death, I think, of 2 dogs. And I think they did some studies on that. And one of them it might have contributed to, but I think the other one sounded like it's a stroke or something like that.
with studying the lake, is it through the state that the biologists work and do all the water study for quality and what's happening, or who does the study of the?
So Division of Water Quality does studies on the water quality. The biologists through Division of Wildlife do the work with the species, the fish and others that are in there, and as well as the shoreline and what's happening there.
Well, Eric, thank you for taking time and making time to be with us today and introduce yourself and give us an update on your work and the progress there. You're welcome anytime. We look forward to more information and certainly ways that we can be helpful and supportive.
Thank you. And I look forward to hearing if you have any questions about the lake, feel free to reach out to me. Our website is easy to find, and I have an easy email address. It's just my name at UtahLakeCommission.org.
So Eric Ellis at Utah
Just
Lake.
Eric.
Eric
at UtahLakeCommission.org.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will move to the city's curbside recycling program in Provo City, and this presentation will come in 2 parts. First, we have a presentation and discussion by our Public Works Director, Mr. Dave Decker. That will be followed by a presentation from Reese, the mill of the Public Services. Mr. Decker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. This presentation is the exact same presentation that we had prepared last week. I'm not sure if the council wants us to go through the entire presentation again, or if you want me just to review what's happened since.
Everybody was here, right, last week, 2 weeks ago? Maybe just a quick 5-minute summary to help us review, and then we can ask questions.
That's fine. We begin with just a quick summary of our current contract. 4 years ago, the city decided to go out for an RFQ for just the recycling portion of our solid waste program. That contract was awarded to Republic Services. It began in August of 2011, and it is up this year at the end of July. You can see that in the first quarter of 2015, we paid $3.35 per can per month, and that is a base rate, and then also some fuel charges that are adjusted in there. You can see the fluctuations there. We also, I'm not sure if this slide doesn't have, I was going to say, I think in the previous presentation we talked about the total number of cans. We have about 10,500 recycling cans out in Provo. That has been on the slow decline. We have an opt-out program that we operate in Provo City, and we have a slide in another presentation that shows over the 4 or 5 years that we've done recycling, the number of cans that are out. Customers right now, they pay $4.75 per month per can, and if they have a black can, which most do, they get a $2 credit on the solid waste can. When we realized a year or so ago, we realized that we were going to be up against the end of the contract. We started considering options, and several months ago we approached Republic Services and asked for a proposal for 4 different options. And those 4 options are shown here on the second page. We handed out this letter that we received in response to the request that we had sent out to Republic, and I believe each of the council members received a hard copy of that letter, their response. This is just a summary of that response. It's a little bit different format. We changed the columns and the rows, but it's the exact same numbers. And let's see. They also, this is in the letter. This is one of the options they extended to us. One of the concerns from a public works standpoint, particularly on an RFQ, as I indicated during the last presentation, when a city wants to go out for an RFQ and rebid any service, whether it's recycling or solid waste, one of the things that is a concern to many of the cities is whether the cans are owned by that third party that is currently bidding. The third party, in any case, has a real advantage, a significant advantage, even if you're just looking in the private sector, because a new private sector vendor would have to come in, probably purchase cans and distribute cans, and so there's a big advantage. And there's several cities, several of them in Salt Lake County, such as South Jordan and Murray City, own their own cans for that exact purpose. It gives them the ability, when they do the RFQ for the private sector, it kind of levels the playing field in the private sector. As we considered the response from Republic, a couple of things started to come out, and this is going back to our first quarter in 2015, as it indicates on this slide. We added the fuel charges to the base price, and then also in these lines we started specifically looking at the cost of the cans if we exercise that option, and so each of those are adjusted based on 4 years of the price that was included in that letter. One of the other options that the city Public Works Department considered was taking it in-house, and considering again those 4 options that are listed here, each of the bullet points, we specifically included how many drivers, how many trucks. We recommended buying 12,000 cans instead of 10,500, just so that we have some additional as far as the inventory. You're going to have some additional on supply. We added tipping fees and fuel and maintenance on the additional trucks, and these are the annual costs for each of those 4 services, those 4 options to bring it in-house. So this is a summary of those 4 options for bringing it in-house. Again, the annual cost is across the top. The monthly cost per can is the second row, and then the can cost for either the opt-out or the mandatory options are shown on the 3rd line. This is the comparison sheet between these 2 options that we're currently considering right now, that we're looking at. And we reviewed that last time. We also spoke a little bit about some of the concerns on customer service. We had Karen Larson from our customer service center come and talk about some of the concerns. We also had Bryce review some of those concerns, and we're happy to review those again if you'd like. Where the significant financial items started coming out is the comparison between the biweekly and the weekly options. The biweekly is on the top of this slide, and you can see on the annual over 7 years the difference. One thing that I should point out on this slide while I'm here, since this presentation has been made, we have received an additional response from Republic. They did adjust the price on that first option. The current program that has a bi-weekly pickup, an opt-out program, the exact same program that we operate right now, they did reduce that by 10 cents per can per month. And so that would affect that very top row right here by $88,000, just over $88,000 over the 7-year period. So that there has been a slight adjustment on that, but all of their services, based on that second letter we received, all other services stayed exactly where they were at. This is one that we have focused on quite a bit, primarily because of the advantages and the things that we're hearing from the residents as far as the weekly pickup program. And you can see over a 7-year period, it's about $1 million difference in the 2 proposals. We also mentioned the financial review. We've had several outside agencies, along with our finance department, review the proposals. And our recommendation, this is the last slide in the presentation, our recommendation, both for financial means and a better coordination for customer service, we're recommending that we move that in-house. If we go to the weekly, if the council and the city administration elects to go to a weekly, we are recommending the rate go from $4.75 to $5.75. It's a $1 increase for essentially doubling the service. So that's the summation. That's the quick review of the presentation last time.
And on the screen before was the $1 increase. Was that included in your table before, just that one?
In this one right here?
With the total cost.
Yes, this is including
a $1 increase.
So these are actual costs. This is not revenue comparison. These are cost comparisons that we're looking at here.
So but that doesn't, you don't know how much. I mean, $1 a can is going to reduce by 10,000. So it's really not. I guess you're looking over the year, so it's 10,500 a year less than what your cost is there. You see what I'm saying?
Well, this comparison right here, the weekly comparison, does take into account that increase, but we're looking at cost alone. One of the questions that are, and maybe this is the best way to answer the question. One of the things that I pointed out last week, our costs are at $4.17 per can on the city proposal. I'll go back to that. right here on the weekly pickup, right there on the city proposal, it's $4.17. We currently charge $4.75 per customer per can, and so the obvious question is why increase the fee at all? And it really comes back to the question about what other expenses are coming out of recycling and solid waste. And we had a short discussion about expenses from the district, and that's the primary thing that we're seeing is this would be nice if it was just operating on its own, but the issue is we are part of the district, and it really has little to do, those district costs have little to do with the operation as far as picking up, whether it's solid waste or recycling. Those costs are going to be there. And so part of our recommendation is just our overall expense at the district. We are happy to do a composting fee, which is very significant, and also the tipping fee, which is also on the increase at the district level. And so we're happy, and we would pay those no matter what, whether it was private, in-house, doesn't matter. We're going to end up paying those. And so that's part of the recommendation for that dollar increase.
Those costs were included.
That's correct.
In that.
One other question I had last week, and I think was that we're doing the billing for that, aren't we? So it really won't affect transfers. It has nothing to do with transfers or anything like that, since we do in-house billing.
We do all the bills.
Does this particular account ultimately contribute to the transfers and enterprise fund from Public Works?
Yes, it does. It's one of the expenses. It's one of the expenses that I was alluding to at the district, but we also have a transfer into the general fund out of the sanitation. And again, that would happen unless we change policy. That would happen.
So the added dollar would allow that to remain much as it is now.
That's correct. Any other questions?
May I just weigh in just a little bit? There was quite a conversation 2 weeks ago about the customer service element of this. And I think regrettably some things were articulated that reflected poorly on our vendor, Republic, and probably not fairly to them. And I think in the customer service realm, we would simply emphasize that we have a little bit of a built-in advantage that they don't have. And I think that was the intent of our conversation more than anything. That, for instance, to reach us, it's one call for our residents. To reach them, it's frequently 2 phone calls. They call us, and then we turn around and have them call somebody else. And so, to the extent that we aligned a good vendor that's worked hard for us, I'd like to publicly acknowledge that they've been a good vendor for us, and we appreciate that service.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes.
So I have one more question. So if we were going to do the weekly opt-out would be $526,000, but the appropriation in the resolution is higher than that. Is that in the event that we do another option, and then we would adjust that amount, or why is this amount higher in the appropriation for our next meeting?
The appropriation is for $612,000, and we've assumed $51 per can for a brand new can. Now, I believe, and that's for 12,000 cans, so you have to be a little careful when we compare 10,500 of the existing cans and the service versus the 12,000 that we would buy for inventory. So
the cans were not included in your cost.
Yes, the cans are included, but the cost per can right here, we're dividing that by the number of the service that we actually provide to the residents. So again, there's a little bit of inventory that you have to maintain for broken cans, rotating people in and out, things like that. That's the reason we're buying a little bit more inventory.
Okay.
But I do have to tell you the cost of the cans, we have done a pretty significant amount of research, and we feel that we're going to get that for less than $51 per can. We have a vendor, we have an RFQ that's out right now, and I believe the results are due back on Thursday this week. And we'll be able to pin down the exact cost, but we're feeling like it's going to be in the mid-40s.
This is a single-sized can.
That's right. It's a 96-gallon can, and it's the same size, very similar to our solid waste cans that we currently operate with.
Those cans are 10-year guaranteed, and they have the chip that we're not using apparently too much right now because with the technology's not there, but within 10 years, who knows what's going to happen.
They do have an RFID tag, and as I indicated in the last presentation, I have worked for a city that did utilize the RFID tags for quite some time. They had a reader, and there are cities and private companies that do use the RFID tags. They have a reader on the side of the truck, and they will pick up the can. Some cities have gone to the point of registering the weight of the can. There's a few cities, it's not common, but there are a few cities that will actually weigh the can on the truck as they lift it up, and they'll charge by weight. It's not widely. California's probably the state that's probably kind of leading the charge with RFID tags right now. So, but I think eventually we will see technology get to the point where we'll start to use those tags.
I mentioned we have about 1.5 million RFID tags in the library. Today, every item in our library is tagged with an RFID tag. So that's how we manage the quick in and out, check-in process at the library. So it's technology we know about for sure.
And all the solid waste cans, the black cans in the city, all have RFID tags already.
Great, thank you, Mr. Decker.
Thank you.
Appreciate the review and update. We now welcome representatives of the Republic Services Organization. Mr. DeMille, I'd like to turn the time over to you. And I know we have some questions and welcome any update that you'd like to provide.
Thank you for allowing me to come in here today. And I just would add that everything that Mr. Decker said on here is the truth, because I wrote the letter, so he got all the numbers straight for me. With that, though, we do have a concern with the article that was written with regards to our customer service, and as a company that is in a very competitive business, our reputation means a lot to us, and we felt that it was important, and that if you would allow me just to kind of, I don't want to make this I don't want to stand up here and just say I'm going to defend every point. That's not the idea. But our reputation is very important to us. And yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with the mayor, and he was very. It was very nice for him to sit down and listen to us for a good time and talk about what we try to do as a company to service your city the best way that we can. I will say that what was reported in the article was a bit of a shock to us. Because we have not received calls with those concerns addressed. I have never received a call from Provo with any concerns addressed to us, nor has our operations manager. We have received some emails, and we were on those. We're not a perfect company, but we were on those very, very quickly. Just by way of what we do as a company, we are hypersensitive to customer service to the point where it drives us all crazy. We have a daily call where every miss in our company is talked about every single day. So if we have a reported miss, the operations manager of that division gets on a call, and he is to explain why that customer was missed. We currently pick up about 273,000 homes in the last a year in your city. Pickups, not homes, but 4.33 times. I'm sorry, every other week, recycling service. We have had reported to us 122 misses through our system. And you'd say, well, if you only get 500 calls, 122 is a lot. Just to give you a little perspective on that, we've received over 16,500 calls this year to date, this year, through our customer service line. And 122 over the past 12 months were about Provo, and 78 of those were actual misses. 44 were worry calls where somebody says, hey, you usually pick me up at 8 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock, where are you? So we don't consider that a miss, but we do consider that someone that's concerned. And then 71 calls On top of that were calls that somebody called and said, hey, I didn't get my can out last night. I know it's 10 o'clock. Can you guys come and get us? And we call those courtesy go-backs, and we went back and picked those up. We obviously have container delivery calls. We delivered 188 cans. We picked up 191. We had 17 containers. Everything is tracked, is what I'm getting at, and taken very seriously. It was concerned that we're not answering the phone. So, over 16,361 calls year to date, to be specific, and 16,009 of those calls were answered, and so that's a 97.8 answer rate. It's as good as you're going to find in any industry where there is a call center. And so I guess our feeling was we were a little bit shocked to see the comments, and our feeling was that we don't want it, whether the city decides to do this this service, and we're not asked to extend the contract. We don't want to leave this with bad feelings or a feeling like that there was an issue. I think the mayor mentioned about a competitive distance. You guys are at a competitive advantage with the one call instead of the two calls. We can't argue that. We can't argue the fact that you guys did an analysis and came up with a cheaper price. If that's what you came up with and you can do it for cheaper, we're not going to argue that. We do question the fact that there was customer service concerns added on top of that was never addressed to me and to our operations team. And that's our only feeling is, if those were the case, we should have been allowed to try to rectify those and make sure that your citizens were treated the right way by us. And so, we would love to stay in your city and serve your city. Obviously, it's my job to extend the contracts. I extend about 49 and 50 of the contracts that ever come up for extension and never go out to bid. We're able to extend them. If it doesn't happen here, we hope that we can at least work with you in some way to make it a smooth transition. Our drivers are not going to start missing cans because you guys elected to go by and do it yourself. It's not the way we're going to do business. We would ask, and hopefully I'm okay with saying this, that if there is an option, and I sent a letter to Mr. Parker today. I don't know if he's received it yet via email, but I did send it because the mayor asked when I said there's some negotiating room in the cart cost. He said, well, don't give us negotiate, give us a price. So I gave you a price, which even if RFID tags were placed into the current cans that are out there, you'd save up $175,000 to $200,000 with the price that I gave you. So
off of what we're currently paying.
Well, off of what an anticipated cost for your new carts would be.
I see. Okay.
So, and then you'd have to figure that out when you get your proposals back on your cart costs. So again, we just we're sensitive to our reputation because we're in a very, very competitive market of business, and we feel like we've served the city the best we can with what we knew the situations were. Any questions?
I'm sure we've heard this before, Mr. DeMille. How many cities does Republic service in our state?
We have 18 contracts in the Wasatch Front, plus all of that doesn't count all of Washington County. We do all of Washington County.
Mm-hmm. Is it a 4-year? Are we currently at the completion of a 4-year contract? Okay.
And the contract, I mean, we could negotiate if it worked better for the city to say, hey, we need 3 more months, or we would like to go to at least to the end of the year, because we would like to budget. If we're not going to be the provider, we would like to budget for that in our budget for 2016, and not have that loss hit in the middle of this year.
For any of those 18 cities, do you provide weekly pickup, or are most of them bi-monthly?
Almost all of them are bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly.
Yep. Yep. I can't think of anybody that we do weekly service for.
I was trying to remember from all those numbers up there. Is there an option if we wanted to go weekly and extend with you? Do you know how much extra that would cost?
I believe our bid was $5.19.
So then,
I believe
what's the differential
our rate
between what we're paying now and what that would be?
You're at $3.20 now, plus a fuel surcharge of 11 cents. I think David had it in there as 15 cents, but it fluctuates with whatever fuel it is. I think our rate for every week opt-out recycling was $5.19, if I remember correctly, plus your fuel surcharge. And we gave pricing for a 4-year extension, and they had it moved out to 7 years, which would have affected our rate. We would have been able to give a better price had we known it was going to go out to 7 years, but that's okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Questions?
Thank you very
All right.
much.
Thank you, Mr. DeMille. Appreciate your coming here and your presentation today. Very helpful. And thank you for your service to our city. Well, it's 3:21 and the agenda calls for a break at 3:20. So seeing that we're on schedule, let's go ahead with the 5-minute break and then we'll reconvene in 5 minutes for the second half of our meeting.
I knew that all along. I predicted that. So Brian, is it wrong for me to get that?
He was hired to work for Orm City.
Did you,
Works.
in review of the documents?
Worked for Orm before he came.
to regard information regarding the acquisition to the local government entity, and the local government entity can request a traffic study as well. And so this, as the presenter who was talking about this said, this is mainly a problem because of the charter schools. The charter schools will come in, and the city won't know anything about their plans, what they're doing. And so this kind of makes it so that they have to at least keep the local government entity informed about that process.
It doesn't change any requirements other than notification, then, is what you're saying.
I think this is helpful in two ways. I think many charter schools are not well acquainted with municipal laws and zoning policies. These charter schools are often run by sort of a lay board of parents sometimes, and they decide to go build a school, and they rush out and they buy property, unbeknownst to them, all these zoning or development issues, and then they have sort of albatross property, or at least a property that's going to cause some unexpected requirements. We've had this happen in Provo. Walden School, one of the examples there was just access, and how we're going to get a street access in there. Had they come on early on and approached us, we could probably talk through a lot of those issues before they came problem. So this is helpful to this.
But they can still, zoning on schools, that's a whole different animal, because schools basically go where they want to go almost, don't they?
Yes, I think the state statute is such that they have pretty broad discretion. They can pretty much go almost anywhere. But these regulations have been tightened up over the years. I mean, a decade ago, charter schools were hardly required to follow any type of land use, like zoning codes. They weren't even required to consult with the city on any level, even through the building process. And as some of these early charter schools got underway, it became evident that these were causing more problems. The amendments have occurred, now require consultation with the city through the whole process. This just furthers that consultation process. And they've also required more charter schools to have to adhere to more of the zoning policies than they originally did. Originally, it was sort of an open door for them, and yes, they're still exempt to certain zoning policies, but not all of them.
So this might be viewed as a slight step toward greater equity between charter schools and public schools.
I agree with that.
All right, and then this one is rental modifications, HB 127. This one essentially, it does a few things, but the main point of it, as the presenter was talking about it, is that there were some municipalities that were requiring developers to bond on certain items that weren't required by code. So they had included extra things as part of their plans, and then the municipality was making them, do some extra things because they were putting these extra features as a part of their plan. This makes it so the municipality cannot do that. The wording that it says here, a couple other things it does is prohibits a municipality from requiring physical changes to a legal non-conforming rental dwelling use, and prohibits a municipality from requiring physical changes to install an egress or emergency escape in certain circumstances.
This is, my commentary on this one is probably a follow-up bill to other legislation that was pretty much targeted at Provo City and our rental landlord ordinance. And I think it's been about 5 years since they took the first big swing, which took what we had adopted and approved to manage rentals as far as licensing. And as part of that licensing, you're required to do about 12 to 14 building code improvements. 5 years ago, a lot of those were eliminated through some statutory language that the state adopted. We won't name names. And then I think this is a follow-up to that, to even further limit our ability to require changes in the issuance of rental dwelling licensing. The silver lining of all that, though, is most of our rental dwellings were inspected, upgrades improved, and licenses issued before any of these took place. So it may affect some future, a small quantity of rentals.
What implications are there for a good landlord program?
Well, I think on Good Landlord, that's more of a voluntary program.
Right.
So anybody opting into the program, you could still require changes as part of this voluntary system. So I don't know, Brian, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this has any direct implications, but you might be able to, if you had interest in skirting what they've removed, you might be able to add that back in.
Including what was removed 5 years ago.
Yes, I think there's definitely a possibility. Okay.
That brings up a good question for me. Would that bring up some possible legal challenges? Since it's a volunteer program, maybe not then. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it depends. If this actually says you may not require this the following, then that could be read as saying you can't require it even for those even inside of the club. I don't know. We'd have to look at that.
It says prohibits. So.
As I read the changes 5 years ago, as well as these more recently, it struck me that one could view the legislative action as spiteful because the regulations that the city of Provo adopted were meant in the interest of health, safety of the residents, and less crime. Those were the primary motives for adopting the policy that it did. And now to have virtually eliminated all of those is to say, well, don't be so interested in health and safety and the lowering of crime. And if we were to implement at some point a good landlord program with appropriate incentives that had those same three motives at the forefront, we might be on a collision course.
It could be, and I don't know that if it passed or not, but there was already the Good Landlord program itself has been under attack up at the legislature, and our good legislators have proposed essentially doing away with it or putting very severe restrictions on what you can require to be part of the program. Those were debated and under consideration this year, and I went to a meeting up at the legislature back when the session first started where we kind of, between developers and rental associations and city representatives, we kind of talked those down into some restrictions that weren't very onerous but met the principles that the legislators in question were trying to serve. But I think your point about the collision course is well taken, and it could be that the collision course, the resolution of the collision course is we can't do it with the landlord program, or the very specific restrictions get put on those programs.
Is this an item that the city had on its lobbying agenda?
Right, how many more do we have?
That was it. The last one was just the transportation bill. If you want me to go into that, I can. But I know we've talked about it at length.
What were the sponsors for that bill? The rental notifications?
I don't have that. I can.
Jeremy Peterson.
Right.
Very good, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I think we've talked about transportation, so we'll just go ahead and move to your next presentation, which is on the 10-year budget forecast for Provo City.
Right, can you bring that up?
Why did you still want me to introduce this?
I can.
I just wanted to say for Ryan present the presentation. I tasked Ryan with this this assignment, and I just wanted to clear our intent on what the purpose of this assignment is, and what it's not. We have high regard for Finance Department and their work, and by no means should this be viewed as a tool to poke them in the eye or trying to cast doubt on any of the good work they do. Some of the motivation for doing this as part of the council's role of oversight, and that role, staff plays a supportive role in doing not only oversight but analysis of policy issues. And 7 years ago, when the council took a more proactive role in hiring staff to assist them in those roles, one of the first positions created was a fiscal policy analyst, to examine, again, the fiscal policies directly. We've dropped sort of the title fiscal, but it's certainly a part of the hiring criteria that we look for in all our analysts, is their ability to not just do the research behind policy and weigh the trade-offs there and outcomes, but also look at things from a fiscal perspective. Both Ryan and Bryce have a high degree of training in looking at these things, and of course that's developing with their experience too. Part of the purpose of this specific project is for them to be able to be more acquainted with the budget in depth, the various working parts and pieces of it, the assumptions that go into it, and the assumptions that go into building projections. Denise Roy did a fabulous job creating the first projections, but so much of that is locked up in her brain and her thought process and the assumptions she used. And so this was an opportunity for us to understand the complexity of the budget and the assumptions going into projecting into the future, so that hopefully we'll be better prepared as the need for independent review and oversight to serve the council. And also at times the administration may not be in a good position to consistently provide the requests of the council, because you have a staff to fill a service gap at times, and I don't think it's an issue of doubting any of her credibility or capabilities, but again, just filling our service to the council. So.
And just to add to that, when we first talked to John Borga and Denise about doing this, we wanted to be sensitive and make sure that they didn't feel like we were poking them in the eye. They've both been very open with everything. In fact, when we first mentioned it, John was excited about it. He said, "Yeah, we'd love to have, love to have you do that," and was very supportive. And I've worked with Denise all along the way in getting this information, so they've been very supportive. So, Matt talked a little bit about the purpose. One of the reasons that we decided to do this is there's an intent statement from the council that talks about closing the 10-year gap, having a sustainable budget. And so we wanted to build a 10-year model from scratch to use in fiscal analysis. That's our stated purpose for doing this. Setting up the model, we decided after looking at different ways that we could do it, we decided to use Excel. It has a forecast function, so we decided to use that in setting it up. The budget, there are a few complications along the way, which is part of the reason that this has taken so long to set up. One of it is when you get the budget, you'll notice that the budget's in categories. And it's not broken out by line item in the budget that you'll receive later today. The problem with that
Before we
is...
go forward, our analysis right now is focused solely on general fund, so not any other funds.
General fund. But over the years, those categories have changed, and so what may be intergovernmental relations today as a category item, 10 years ago didn't have the exact same line items then as it does now, and so we couldn't do it based on categories. They've changed over the years, and they did a pretty substantial change when they moved to the GFOA budgeting and started submitting their budget to get awarded the GFOA budgets. That's when they kind of did an overhaul of these categories. And so in order to do an apples to apples going back 10 years, we had to do the line items. And there's 444 line items that have at least one, that have been at least budgeted once over the past 12 years. So quite an expansive spreadsheet. There's also manual edits in there. So went through first and did Excel's forecast function to forecast the next 10 years. But the function, the model's not perfect. An example is a grant that started maybe 2 years ago for $2 million. Last year was $1 million. Well, the function would forecast 0 this year and then negative $1 million next year. And so there had to be, I had to go in and make some manual edits. And so, we did that with many of them. And then also having more knowledge of the different line items. An example of this is the retirement, right? It was really URS. It was really expensive during some of those years, especially during the recession. And going forward, they've said that it's not going to be. And so some of those we've talked to finance and seen what what they've been told from outside entities about how to project that going forward. So there have been some manual edits with the model that we have. One of the questions that, as we were going through this presentation, Matt and I, that he asked was, what about inflation? If you look at finance's model, they have all their assumptions. They have the budget, and then they have all their assumptions underneath, and they put in a number for inflation. Well, the inflation on this model built in, right? So whatever the inflation's been for staffing for the last 10 years, that'll be that going forward, or whatever other inflation is just inherently built into the model.
Could I just restate that in a way that I think it makes more sense to me? Is there's a general inflation rate, nationally and regionally, and typically someplace between 2.5% and 4%. However, certain expenses have much higher or lower inflationary rates. So retirement's a good example of where some of the years we've had 6, 7, 8% inflation rates. Healthcare is another one. And so rather than just applying a general across-the-board inflation rate to all the categories, this model is a little more specific in looking at the trend of inflation for that line item.
So the initial result, and one thing that needs to be stated is when we receive the budget today, it's already going to be updated. So I'll already have to update, with the new numbers that we received today. But this is based on, what we had at the time. If you look at the total gap, and I'll show you the spreadsheet here in a minute. But you see the Excel model, which is what we created. The gap is $16.7 million over the actually 9-year period. Because what I did this year is just close the gap because I didn't know what the budget was going to be. But anyway, so 16.7 million, finance model 14.5 million. That fiscal year 2024 gap is 3.2 million in the Excel model, 3.6 million in finance model. So you can see that over time, there's a little bit of a difference, but there's still quite a significant gap. And as you use different methods to do forecasting, you're always going to find differences like that. So just talk a little bit about it here and let you see some of it. So for those of you that were on council or attended the council meetings when we did Truth in Taxation 2 years ago, we set up a similar graph here where you can put in the inputs and you can see the graph change as you did different things to the budget over a 10-year period. And so
if I could just say, one of the goals I have for Ryan is produce a tool that would be easy enough to give, not just to you, but any citizen, say, with a little instruction, you can play with this yourself and see what it does. And so it's in some ways also an educational tool, or your own personal scenario tool that with a little bit of training you'd be able to do.
So, so you can see here, this is the 10-year projection, and one of the things as we're going through this, you pay attention to what's the difference in fiscal year 2025, right? Because essentially, if you're wanting to close a gap, that's the gap you're wanting to close. That in 10 years from now, there's no gap, and then the total 10-year difference, 23 million. And so the goal would be to develop an online tool. Right now, this is just in Excel, but we would develop this online for citizens to be able to use. So using the online tool, the council in the past and an intent statement has expressed interest in doing a truth in taxation yearly to keep up with inflation. So say we put in a 3% annual property tax increase. What would that do to the gap? And if you notice, going back to the slide before, again, the difference in 2025, 3.4 million, difference now, 2.2 million. So you have significant savings if you do it annually, right? If you just did it 1 year, it's not going to make a huge dent. But if you did that annually, and that 3%, that's when you can see a major dent. Another example, if you just found, so two of the categories here is one-time cost savings, recurring cost savings. You can inherently know that there's going to be a huger impact if it's a recurring cost savings than if it's just one time. And so, I put in, say we found $1 million that was recurring that we could save over the next 10 years. Again, you go from 3.4 million in 2025 down to 2.4 million, finding that savings. Say you were to do both of them. You see the gap shrinking, and it's down to 1.2 million, and the overall is down to 8.5 million. So this just kind of helps you, think about, well, if I cut certain programs, how much is that program? What's that going to be? And then you can also put in revenue there as well, right? You get certain revenue that's going to close the gap as well. Now, one of the things we wanted to do is show you an example of how we would apply this to something that you're going to have to approve, something that you're dealing with. And so I decided to just go back and look at a policy analysis that we've done that we could apply this on. And we did a report for the bicycle master plan analyzing that. And one of the things we talked about, and the council didn't come out and say what their policy was. It was just kind of stated in the bicycle master plan that phase 1 would happen over a 1 to 5 year period. We never said specifically 1 year, specifically 5 years or more years. And so in the bicycle master plan, we did this little chart here, which is very simplistic. If we did all the projects of phase 1 in 1 year, it'd be $5.2 million. If we did over 3 years, it'd be that amount, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And if applying this to the model, you can kind of get a better sense for how that would impact the budget. So, if we did all of phase 1 the first year, you can see a pretty significant spike there, right, of $5 million. And if you wanted to close the gap that year, it's going to be a lot harder to do. Well, if you did it over 5 years, you can see the gaps wider for those 5 years. And at least that could kind of help you think, well, what is the revenue source we're going to get over those 5 years? Or what are the programs we're going to get over those 5 years? Instead of just saying, yeah, we'll put that as part of our policy that we're going to accomplish that in 5 years, right? Or maybe when you see that, you say, well, this is, increasing this total difference. Well, let's space it out over more years. This is the 10-year projection, what it's going to like at 10 years out. If you did, going back to that, $522,000 a year for 10 years, that's what it's going to like. And then if you did it over 20 years, the gap's going to obviously be less because you're expanding it over time. And so this is the kind of analysis that we built this tool for, that we can be able to show those things, and that way you can, instead of just it being a pipe dream, or instead of it just being something that's out there, you can actually see how that will impact our budget if we actually do what the bicycle master plan says. And since it's going to impact our budget, where's that funding going to come? And so that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions about how the model is set up or about anything else, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, I have forgotten, if you go back to that slide where we were looking at the property tax increase, and it showed about 20.
From this one?
No.
document interest in the ITOT zone. We've been getting calls and questions about what they can do there, and that's when we thought we'd look at it again and make sure that it's clear for them.
So it's restricted to that zone?
It's the ITOT zone. It's the low density residential, medium density residential, high density residential, campus mixed use.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. Looks like you're going to present the next item to us as well.
Yes.
On the ordinance amendment to another code section, recreational vehicle storage and towing impound yards.
Okay, so just background on this one. We had two different applications coming for conditional use permits in different parts of the city for impound yard. As these two people started to go through the CRC review, we had a problem with one condition found in Title 1434-350, which regulates impound yards, and that was having them located directly accessing off of the collector or arterial road. So we encouraged the applicant to pursue different solutions for this. The first we provided to him was to talk to engineering, see if they could reclassify the Industrial Parkway was the one road and the Riverside Avenue was this applicant's road. Reclassify those into a collector or arterial to see if that would be a good solution. With discussions with engineering, that didn't look like it was a possibility. So then we started to look at a code amendment. What could we do that the staff would encourage and help them with, that we would support, where it would also help them put their businesses in the location that they desired. So the first proposal added some language to that first condition. Then staff kind of looked at that and had some talks with Public Works Engineering and brought it through the CRC review process on, what would it do to just strike that condition? Would that be a problem in any of these areas where a possible impound yard could be placed? So there's 4 zones where impound yards are permitted as a conditional use. Heavy manufacturing, CM, M1, M2, and PIC zone. So there's just 4 zones in the city where impound yards can be located. So we reviewed those areas, looked at adjacencies, any issues that could come from them, and determined that just striking that first condition with the additional conditions in the zone and the limited zones that impound yards can be located in, that staff could support just removing that condition of being located on a collector or arterial. Plan Commission reviewed it, recommended approval. There were a couple of dissenting votes due to some different issues with the applicant and the way they pursued it, and adjacencies to residential projects that were already in these zones. But in the end, they recommended approval. And yeah, so I'll take any questions on this as well.
What was the concern with the way that they approached it?
So Diane Christensen drove by this applicant's proposed property, and she said that it appeared that they were already operating, which would mean that they were operating without a license. And she felt that that way of doing business and then coming to ask the city for this approval was not the proper way to go. So that kind of made her want to vote it in, I believe.
And what residential areas? So would that mean that the towing would be going down residential streets frequently with the?
The areas we looked at, not really. So this Riverside location, up the street from it, is a student housing project, but they wouldn't necessarily have to go past or through that residential project that's already located there.
They could, but they wouldn't have to.
Right.
In the zones that you listed where this is permitted like as a conditional use. You cite the example, was it Riverside?
Riverside Avenue.
And apparently in that particular case, there is a way of solving the problem of how shall I put it, interfering with residential feel of the neighborhood, let's say.
Right. So just a little more explanation on that one. Their current location is on that same street, just 2 properties up and across the street. So their current location was closer to that residential project. They're actually moving farther away. And in the years that they've been there, there wasn't any issues with that. And we think that this new location would even improve the viability of that street.
Let's suppose that others who operate similar properties, that is, who operate similarly, their towing yards, did not provide this kind of a felicitous proximity. What would occur in that case that would adequately prevent the disturbance of the residential field?
Going through all those zones on the map, the CM zone, M1 and 2, and the big zone, there are only 2 other locations where those zones are somewhat adjacent to residential areas. The one is in Franklin on 5th South, and in the process of creating a Franklin neighborhood plan that we're doing right now, it's proposed that those zones would be removed from that neighborhood. So that would take care of that one. The other one was down in the PIC zone in Spring Creek neighborhood. But any available land for impound yard in that area is pretty distant from the residential neighborhood over there.
Thank you.
Do you know how long the business has been operating there, or if there have been any complaints?
So I believe University Towing, which is on the Riverside, has been at their corner location for quite a few years. I can't give you the number. The applicants that were looking at this for a solution on Riverside Avenue and down in the Industrial Parkway just recently bought those properties in the last year, and their conditional use permits are pending in this ordinance.
Do we have an aerial view of those?
I didn't attach, maybe I should have brought in that slide, but if we could find it on the map. So it's 1530 North Riverside Avenue is the one location that the applicant. Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. North.
No, that's Columbia Lane. You gotta go further north.
So there's Riverside. Just pull it down a little bit more. There we go. So here is their past location where they were doing business before. Here's that student project you're referring to. So they'd be moving from here down to this corner.
Those the storage. Is
That's
the
the old
service-
Riverside Collision, isn't it?
Branbury? Is that what you're pointing to?
Yeah, Branbury.
So that's Branbury. They were there, now they're moving
Down here.
Is that the Riverside Collision?
Yeah, so they've basically worked out a swap of locations.
And what's, and that's, there's some homes across the street? Or
So this was
what's there?
a multifamily project to put in, I don't know how many years ago.
There's no access from Riverside to that. I don't think that you can access that multifamily from Riverside.
I think the access right here, actually, yeah.
Oh, do they?
That took place in the early 90s, and that was Fletcher zone property that got zone changed to multifamily. That's how that got built.
So back in the day, in the commercial general zone, the CG zone, you could build to the R3 standard. And that was pretty common, and it happened in several projects where in the commercial general zone, you could build to the R3, which is about a 24 unit per acre density.
Which is what that is. It's the stacked condos and complexes.
And then just to the north of their proposed property where you'd like to move to, is that a business there, or is that a residential?
No, that's a business. So yeah,
That's
there's
like
standard
these are all businesses up to.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
Roofing.
And this looks like a smaller parcel that they're moving to,
Yeah, it's much smaller.
because they don't need,
Or
or they want to sell that property.
I can guess
The
that they
towing
want to
ordinance
use
just
all the
shut them
space.
down? Is that what you said? Okay.
And that road is not a collector?
So, after the roundabout, it becomes a collector. This section of it is not.
Is it, and there's no other, and then there was one other place you said where it could.
Yeah, on
be
Industrial Parkway
residential?
down off of 1860 South, down across from the sewer treatment plant. That's the other conditional use permit that's pending this. They've bought that location, and the last time I was through there, it doesn't look like they've done anything. But I think they're just waiting.
The only residential down there is Tim Brooks' neighborhood, isn't it? Or what other residential's down in
There's
that area?
not any residential on there.
Oh, no residential?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was where it butts residential, okay. And there are no other areas in the city where that would affect it? Just
not
thinking
that-
long-term,
Yeah.
any sort of unintended.
And that's what we try to analyze, is
Yeah.
if in the future this would pose a problem and we didn't find any other issues.
We wouldn't need to write anything into the code to, in the event that it abuts a residential.
Right, with the 4 zones that permit it, and then these additional conditions in 1434, 350.
I feel like that's pretty good.
Would regulate it enough where it would become.
So even at his previous location, he didn't conform to that ordinance because
Well-
he wasn't towing in from a collector. He was
He
still
had
south of the,
access here,
yeah.
which this is a.
But when he towed my car, he didn't.
Go back to the previous amendment.
Can we go back to the language? To the proposed language, yeah.
I'm sorry, to the amendment prior to this one.
Oh, the staff initiated one?
Yes.
Okay.
And you mentioned that as I recall, the ITOD zone included, and then you enumerated 3 or 4
Yeah, so here's
zones.
the identity zones, and if you scroll up, there's the ITOD.
Yeah. I wonder if there might be merit just in identifying those specific zones by
Sure.
name, and with that list that you already have, perhaps in parentheses,
Yeah.
indicating specifically what those other zones are.
I think that'd be helpful.
I know it was helpful to me to hear you say that, and I didn't recall reading it directly in the language.
Yeah, thank you, that's good.
The proposed amendment.
All right, very good. Any other questions on either of these proposed changes? If not, we'll look forward to discussing them again on the 19th during the council session. Thank you, Aaron. We'll now turn to Mayor Curtis in case you have any administrative updates or items you'd like to review the council at this time.
Thank you for the opportunity. We're good. We'll look forward to discussing the budget with you tonight. That's been our big focus.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Mr. Jones, I believe a request has been made for a closed session.
That's my understanding, and the purpose for that closed session would be to discuss, I believe it's purchase or sales.
We have two.
Oh, two.
We have two in one category, one in the other.
Okay, so there's multiple categories, all of which fall under the strategy session, the categories of strategy sessions for purchase or sale of property, which are approved purposes for closed sessions.
Thank you. Then I will look for a motion to close the session at this time. By Ms. Santiago, thank you, and a second by Ms. Hales. Thank you. Those in favor? All right. And the session is now closed. Move to in the other room. So we'll move to the other conference room for our closed session.
Amazing.